More decapitated heads. Hello, my name's Marc Morris. I'm a medieval historian and I'm here to break down clips from TV shows and films about the Middle Ages. We are going to look at a bit of Game of Thrones, and this particular clip is known as the Red Wedding. So what's going on here is everyone's sat down to dinner and it seems that hatchets have been buried and a peace has been brokered and it's been sealed with this marriage between the two houses. But at the last moment it's seen to be a ruse and everyone is armed and everyone is now being massacred in the most horrible way imaginable, being stabbed and shot with crossbows. People often ask me to comment on the realistic nature or the realism or otherwise of fantasy shows like Game of Thrones, and the answer very much depends on which bit of the Middle Ages they are supposed to be based on, because that kind of behaviour absolutely par for the course in England prior to the Norman conquest. You could get away with pretty much all of that stuff. And there's lots of examples I can think of off the top of my head. The Godwin family in the years leading up to 1066, or indeed an English Earl Waltheof of Northumbria in the years immediately after 1066, doing things in an old school Anglo-Saxon way by executing his enemies when he had apparently patched things up with them. He had them round to dinner and then had them all bloodily murdered. After the conquest, no. Going forward into the 12th and 13th centuries, they didn't do that kind of thing. They spared each other, even if they really hated each other.
I'll find another.
Now that line, I'll find another wife, that's the kind of thing you get in kind of stories from all periods across the Middle Ages, like, you know, we'll execute your son, oh, I can make more sons, you know, we'll execute your wife, I can marry another wife. That's the kind of thing that villains say all the way through the Middle Ages.
The Lannisters send their regards.
We should have done this before lunch, shouldn't we? I suppose we ought to give Game of Thrones a rating out of 10 for historical accuracy. We're going to say if this is based on the kind of thing that went on prior to the Norman conquest, then 10 out of 10. Absolutely nailed it, George R.R. Martin. Probably do quite well, that chap. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Just a minute. Robin Hood steals money from my pocket, forcing me to hurt the public. And they love him for it.
Of course, we have the late, great, irreplaceable Alan Rickman playing the Sheriff of Nottingham, one of his greatest comic turns.
Yes. That's it then. This hooded viper simply slithers into the forest. You, Myram, 10:30 tonight. You, 10:45. Bring a friend.
Lots to enjoy there, mostly Alan Rickman's performance as the Sheriff of Nottingham. Lots of anachronisms which are deliberate, like you 1045, you know, as if he's got an early 13th century digital clock somewhere in his castle. My main bugbear with films of this era and depictions of the Middle Ages like this on screen is the drabness of the interiors. I mean, obviously the Sheriff of Nottingham is the villain, and so he has to be in a sort of drab, evil-looking environment. So he has to have burning torches on the walls and candles everywhere. And yet we know that Norman castles like this were a riot of colour inside. So if you go, for example, to Dover Castle, it's a riot of colour. Vivid reds and bright blues and gold and silver and vermilion, etc. Because these were the richest people in society. These were kings or earls or sheriffs, you know. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was a film that came out when I was a teenager, and even then we were aware of its anachronisms. You don't have to be kind of like a fully paid up medieval historian with a doctorate to know that you can't get off the boat at Dover and then be at Hadrian's Wall by nightfall. And I think that this was done in a tongue-in-cheek way by the film's producers. They knew they were taking huge liberties and they didn't care. So I sort of salute it as a piece of filmmaking and historical fiction. So a score for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, I think probably it's round about a 7 in terms of its historical accuracy, maybe a 6. 7 because I'm affectionate towards it. Ironclad.
England in the year 1215 had been under the reign of King John for 16 years. John was renowned for losing wars with France levying punitive taxes and sleeping with the wives of barons.
You see, I think that's a reasonably good summary of King John. He was a coward who repeatedly lost battles and lost war and lost land. He did tax England more heavily than any king since the Norman Conquest 150 years earlier, and he did, according to contemporary chroniclers, force himself on the womenfolk of his nobility. So these are all things that annoyed people. But we go on.
A baron?
Barons wearing hats. Okay, so that's the first big no-no. Now we're in trouble. So hats, you don't have hats in the early 13th century.
Finally rebelled against their king and became locked in a bloody civil war, lasting for over 3 years.
There wasn't a 3-year civil war. They rebelled against him. They finally rebelled against him in the spring of 1215, and they brought him to Runnymede in the space of weeks.
And decimating both armies. In time, the Knights Templar were drawn into this conflict.
Where the Knights Templar come in, I think the Knights Templar are drawn into this conflict because the Knights Templar sound sexy. The Knights Templar have nothing to do with this conflict. I mean, I wrote a book about King John, and the Knights Templar, I think maybe, I don't say they don't even get a look in, they might get a mention, but they are certainly not central to the story as this film would have you believe.
King John and his royal army were eventually defeated.
King John wasn't defeated in battle. And then what really did for John in the sort of, it's barely a civil war, in the standoff between him and his barons in the spring of 1215 is the barons seized London. And that is what forced John to negotiate. It was the loss of his capital and the treasury that was in the Tower of London. So he was forced to negotiate at Runnymede in 1215 because of that, not because he was beaten into submission by this point.
That John could remain on the throne on one condition: that he would sign a document.
Sign. Look, they're signing. They're actually they're not just saying sign, which I think is forgivable because sign might mean affix your seal to, but they actually show John and all the barons signing, writing their names at the bottom of Magna Carta. You can check surviving copies of Magna Carta. There are no signatures.
England welcomes you. Does the Pope hold his word? Oh no, have faith, Captain Tiberius.
Captain Tiberius. I've no idea where this guy's supposed to be from. He looks like a Viking, though. I think there's a suggestion later in the film that these guys are pagans. I mean, John did recruit foreign mercenaries to fight against his native baronage, but he got them from the Low Countries. He got them from Christian places like Flanders. This story has been improved by suggesting they've come from, I think, 9th century Scandinavia.
His Eminence is waiting to hear you. Hold to yours. The church will stay out of your lands. You have his word.
Okay, so the church will stay out of your lands, implying these guys are heathens. So this is King John sort of employing Vikings who've been hiding in the North Sea zone for 4 centuries. Yeah, King John and Magna Carta is a subject I know a fair bit about, because I did a book for Penguin about King John. King John's reign has a great ending. I mean, you can't ask for a better ending for a reign than it to end in a civil war against his own barons and foreign invasion and sort of the country set aflame, and it's all very dramatic stuff. And so there's absolutely no need to sort of push the boat out even further and say, well, he must have Vikings as his allies and he must sign Magna Carta, and it sort of smacks of laziness, I think. So I think I'm only going to give Ironclad maybe a 3 out of 10 for historical accuracy.
Mercy.
The Last Kingdom.
Form our lines. Form our lines! Shields up!
Right, so they're forming a shield wall.
Advance! Come on!
Lots and lots of them.
Shield, lock!
I mean, one of the problems with this period is we have virtually nothing in the way of written sources describing battle tactics. So to some extent you can get away with whatever you like when you're making movies covering this period. Boom. So this is the generally accepted way that armies made war in the 9th, 10th centuries is two shield walls clashing and colliding. Though, as I say, when it comes to written sources from those 2 centuries, we have virtually nothing. So how they actually fought is anyone's guess. But a shield wall, or the clash of shield walls, is the generally accepted method. So here we've got the Vikings riding into the English or the Anglo-Saxon camp and attacking non-combatants, which strikes me as a bit of a flaw in the English plan. I mean, why are the non-combatants so exposed on the field? This is what Vikings would do. Vikings don't play by the rules. I mean, nobody really played by the rules. There weren't really many rules in 9th century warfare. I think this is a bit of a major Achilles heel for the English. People being ridden down and mowed down. She looks important.
I have a gift for you! Your queen!
That'll do it. Problem I have with this is the fact that that's exactly the kind of behaviour I would expect from a Viking army, is those kind of atrocities that you might not associate with later medieval warfare, you would totally anticipate in the 9th or 10th centuries. So I see this as a kind of a major lack of foresight, that they haven't thought they're Vikings, they might sneak round the back and attack the non-combatants. See, the Viking leader has just shouted no mercy, as if anyone would anticipate mercy from Vikings. They're not being very chivalrous, these Vikings. So that was a clip from The Last Kingdom, which is a TV series based on books by Bernard Cornwell, who's been very complimentary about my own book. It looks tremendous. I would give it sort of a strong 9 out of 10 in terms of the visuals. Perhaps just a 6 or 7 out of 10 when it comes to that particular story element. I think the English should have seen that coming. Okay, so now we're going on to Vikings.
Let us prepare! Look at what they've done.
What have they done? More decapitated heads. So here we've got the Vikings turning up, their ships emerging from the mist, and people, the English, saying, look what they've done. And they have also decapitated their enemies' heads, which is exactly the kind of thing I'd expect Vikings to do. I think one of the things that made Vikings so terrifying for Anglo-Saxons or for English was the fact that they had done the same thing. If you look at English chronicles from the 7th century, the 8th century, they make war in exactly the same way. They chop each other to bits after battle. They put heads on spikes and hands on spikes. So they'd only recently stopped doing this themselves, and I think the arrival of the Vikings was a kind of reminder of the pagan past from which the English themselves had emerged. There's really no atrocities I would put past Vikings, so in that respect I think this is pretty much on the money. Based solely on that clip, 9 out of 10. Now, Braveheart. Oscar-winning film. Hard to believe.
Where are you going? I'm going to pick a fight.
Mel Gibson, of course, covered in woad, like they did in 14th century Scotland. Sorry, late 13th century Scotland. They didn't.
Here are Scotland's terms. Lower your flags and march straight back to England, stopping at every home you pass by to beg forgiveness for 100 years of theft, rape and murder.
I mean, I've been asked to comment a lot over the years on Braveheart because my first big book was a biography of the villain of this film, King Edward I, the English king who they pretty much exclusively refer to as Longshanks, which that bit is historically accurate. Edward was called by several contemporary chroniclers Edward the Long or Edward with the Long Shanks. So 10 out of 10 for accuracy there. And like a lot of historical epics, a lot of the foreground detail in this is very, very accurate. So the armour's very good. It's just on the cusp of plate armour. So we've got mail shirts and little bits of plate being added. The detail's very accurate. The problem with Braveheart and other films like it is they get the history wrong and they get the mentalities wrong. And that's the great lie at the heart of Braveheart, is that line that Gibson speaks just then when he says, lower your flags, march back to England, stopping in every village you pass through to apologise for 100 years of rape, pillage and slaughter, or whatever it was. The tragedy about the war between Scotland and England that was unleashed in Edward I's reign is, for the previous century, they'd been getting on like a house on fire, the English and the Scots. The aristocracies had married together. There were countless aristocrats on both sides of the border who'd been married. There had been tradesmen, merchants crossing the border from England to set up shop in new Scottish boroughs. There had been royal weddings. There had been monks from English monasteries going into Scotland to found Scottish daughter houses. So culturally, the gap between these two countries was being closed in the 13th century, and they hadn't had anything so much as a skirmish for about 60 or 70 years, I think, prior to 1097, I think this film starts in. So that's the fallacy, really, that is the problem with Braveheart. Braveheart is not based on history, though. Braveheart is based on a 15th century tract called The Wallace by Blind Harry. It's fueled by the very genuine hatred that the English and the Scots had for each other as a result of, by this stage, 2 centuries of knocking, 7 bells out of each other. That, as I say, there's a far more accurate story of William Wallace to be told. Whether it makes good cinema or not is anyone's guess.
Do that, and your men shall live. Do it not, and every one of you will die today.
Mel Gibson, Woad Warrior. So we have to come up with a rating for Braveheart. Again, it depends what you're rating. If you're rating the costumes, then it's probably a 9 or a 10 out of 10. In terms of the history, it's probably a 5 out of 10. It's the way the Scottish saw their history by, say, the 15th century. Filmmakers, when they stretch for accuracy, often end up delivering a very po-faced version of the past. And of course, in all these periods, there was high-heartedness and there was humour, and it's a pity they can't capture that some of the time. I mean, the other thing is that I've commented on is these films are awash with violence. You do get the misapprehension that the Middle Ages were basically anarchic, and that, any amount of violence was acceptable, and it was lawless, and so it was every man for himself. Never go out your house without putting your helmet on, otherwise someone will dash your brains in and there'll be another cinematic arterial splurt of blood. But for most people in the Middle Ages, life, if not pleasant, was not they didn't experience these levels of violence every day on a day-to-day basis. We do get this skewed view of the Middle Ages by what's offered up to us in films like this. I'm not here to say, the Middle Ages was a great time to live. I'm very happy living in the early 21st century, thank you very much. But it was a good deal more pleasant than these films would have you believe. Thanks for watching. You can get my new book, The Anglo-Saxons, in hardback and in audio by clicking the link in the description below. And don't forget to click here to subscribe to Penguin for more videos like this.